Hello everyone, and welcome to Hopeful Moments 1. Today, we are about to embark on an emotional journey, a story filled with heartache, misunderstandings, and the deep cracks that can form within family relationships. A family is meant to be a warm haven, brimming with trust and understanding, yet sometimes those dearest to us become the very source of our deepest pain. This story centers on the main character, a person who had to face betrayal not from a stranger, but from his own stepfather. Instead of playing the role of a second father or a pillar of emotional support, this man became the one who sowed severe misunderstandings and shattered the peace of the entire family. Not only did he hurl baseless accusations, but he also deliberately fabricated evidence to tarnish the main character's honor, making him appear guilty in the eyes of his most beloved ones. So, what drove the stepfather to act in such a manner? Was it jealousy, selfishness, or simply a desire to control everything his way? His actions not only destroyed one person but also destabilized the fragile trust that binds a family together. The main character wasn't just misunderstood, he was isolated, as even those closest to him turned their backs without giving him a chance to explain. Today's story is not just a personal tale, it reflects a heartbreaking reality that many families face. When trust is wounded, when those who should protect and understand each other become the very source of pain, where does that leave the relationship? Can the truth ever be revealed? Can the wounds in one's heart ever heal? And most importantly, can lost trust ever be restored? Join us as we follow this dramatic tale unfold. If you find today's story full of emotions and valuable lessons, please don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to our channel as we continue our journey of exploring meaningful stories about life. I'm not quite sure where to begin, but perhaps I should start by saying that this story is deeply personal. My father passed away when I was just 15 years old. It was a tremendous shock for me, even though my parents weren't particularly close during his final years. His death left a massive void in my heart, yet my mother didn't seem to break down as I expected. Perhaps she had long become accustomed to the distance between them, or maybe she put on a brave face for my sake. In any case, I could clearly sense that our family had been forever changed. 2 years later, when I turned 17, I made the decision to join the army. I left the home where I had grown up, leaving behind everything familiar. Just 1 year after I left, my mother remarried. I remember the day she called to break the news, her voice calm, as if this were a completely natural step. I didn't oppose it, but I couldn't help but feel lost. I never truly warmed up to my new stepfather. Not because he was a bad person, but simply because we were so different. He was a hard-edged, practical man, while I was still trying to find my place in the world. He frequently teased me about things I held dear, and whenever I showed any sign of displeasure, he would just shake his head and say, "Grow up already." Perhaps, in his eyes, I was just a sensitive, stubborn child, incapable of facing life's harsh realities. In my eyes, however, he was a rigid man, lacking understanding. We didn't hate each other, but the arguments between us, two strangers forced to share a home, seemed inevitable. Many times, our quarrels escalated into exchanges of hurtful words. I won't claim that all the blame lies with him, I had my share of faults too. The loss, the loneliness, and the feeling of alienation within my own home made me more volatile. Yet, despite everything, there was never truly any connection between us. We were merely two strangers forced to share part of our lives, neither knowing how to truly accept or understand the other. After nearly 5 years of medical isolation, I finally returned home. My mother and stepfather told me they were overjoyed to see me again, that I would always be a part of the family. Their words brought me some relief, yet deep inside, I still felt a tinge of alienation. So much had changed during my absence, and I wasn't sure I still belonged there. From the very start, I made it clear that I would only stay temporarily until I could become independent and find a job. I even offered to pay rent so as not to be a burden, but my mother immediately refused. She said I was her son, and I would always have a place here, with no need to worry about money. However, just 3 days after returning, when it was only my stepfather and me at home, he unexpectedly asked me what I thought a fair rent would be. I was taken aback, but since it was his house, I didn't object, and we reached an agreement. I kept this matter a secret from my mother, thinking that if he hadn't mentioned it in her presence, he likely didn't want her to know. I've never demanded anything from them, not out of resentment, but simply because I wanted to be self-reliant, to do everything on my own. Yet, one thing still pained me deeply. My stepfather has a son from his previous marriage. Though we don't share many common interests, we get along fine without any significant conflict. What stung, however, was the glaring disparity. His son received tremendous support from the family, tuition paid, a car provided, housing supported throughout college and even after graduation. I'm only slightly younger than him, which meant that when I returned, he was still financially supported. I don't need those things. I'm not envious, nor do I expect similar help. But I can't help feeling that there's a clear double standard. He is supported in every possible way, while I, the one who just returned after such a challenging time, am expected to pay rent after only 3 days. Perhaps I never truly belonged here. 3 months later, I decided to move out. Not because I hated the place or there was some major conflict, but because I felt I needed my own space to grow and truly become independent. The day I left, my mother hugged me tightly and gave me countless words of advice, as if I were still the little boy I once was. My stepfather didn't say much, he just nodded at me, but there was something inscrutable in his eyes. I couldn't tell if it was satisfaction or simply his usual indifference. Not long after starting my new life, I met a girl. I can't even begin to describe it, but from the very first conversation with her, I was completely captivated. She spoke so naturally and humorously, and her smile always made me feel at ease. We quickly grew close, and gradually, our feelings deepened into something profound. This was my first serious relationship, and I felt as if I were living in an endless dream. However, when the thought of introducing her to my family crossed my mind, I became terribly anxious. My mother and I are extremely close, and I know she always expects me to choose the right person. I was afraid she would judge her, afraid she wouldn't accept her, and worse, I feared that if my mother didn't like her, I would be forced to choose between the two people I hold dearest. But it turned out that all my worries were completely unnecessary. From the very first meeting, my mother and she hit it off so well that I couldn't believe it. They chatted away like old friends, sometimes even going for walks or shopping together without me tagging along. Every time I saw them happily spending time together, I felt an overwhelming joy, as if my world was finally complete. What surprised me even more was that my stepfather grew quite fond of her too. He isn't one to easily show his emotions, but I could see that he was genuinely at ease when she was around. It was the first time I realized that, perhaps, even if I didn't want to admit it, I longed for a better relationship with him. Previously, I always kept my distance from my stepfather. We were simply people with contrasting personalities. But as I learned more about his past, I began to see him from a different perspective. My stepfather was once a child abandoned by his biological father. He grew up without anyone's support, overcoming hardships on his own, graduating from college, and securing a respectable job. I had never thought about that before, but now I understood why he always stressed the importance of self-reliance and insisted that I grow up. Gradually, I realized that maybe he wasn't as cold or distant as I once thought, perhaps he simply loved in his own unique way. Nearly a year later, I became absolutely certain that she was the one I wanted to spend my life with. I couldn't imagine a day without her, nor could I envision a future where she wasn't a part of it. This decision didn't come from one particular moment, but from countless little moments, the mornings waking up together, the times when she silently listened to my heart, and those moments when I felt I could be truly myself by her side. When I told my mother and stepfather about my intention to propose, their reactions far exceeded my expectations. My mother screamed with joy and hugged me tightly, as if I had just announced the most important news of my life. She had always adored her, and in that moment, I realized that she had long regarded her as a daughter. My stepfather, though not one to show much emotion, wore a genuine smile on his face, a rare sight indeed. He placed his hand on my shoulder and said, "You've chosen the right person." That was one of the few times I felt a true connection with him. Then, my mother did something I never expected. She walked into the room, rummaged through an old, dusty box, and carefully took out a ring. I recognized it immediately. It was the engagement ring my father had once given her. She had kept it all these years, never selling it or hiding it away from her memories. Gently, she placed the ring into my hand and said, "Your father once gave this to me with all his love, and now I want you to continue cherishing it." I took the ring, feeling not only the weight of the metal but also the weight of years, memories, and the love of our family all encapsulated within it. I knew that my job didn't pay much, and perhaps I couldn't afford a lavish ring, but that didn't matter. This ring wasn't just a piece of jewelry, it was a symbol, a piece of my family that I wanted to pass on to the woman I love. When I got down on one knee to propose, she burst into tears. But they weren't tears of mere surprise or simple emotion, they were tears of sincerity. As I slipped the ring onto her finger, she whispered, "I love it. Not just because of its meaning, but because it's a part of you." I have never been happier in my life. We began planning our wedding, and what surprised me the most was the offer from my mother and stepfather. They said they would help us financially. This was the first time in my life that they had proactively offered to support me monetarily. That meant so much to me, not only because it eased our burden, but also because it showed that they truly regarded me as part of the family, a person they wanted to uplift, rather than just a daughter's child. Looking back on everything, I realized that my journey wasn't just about my love for her, it was also a journey of healing the gaps within my family. And I knew that no matter what happened in the future, I would never have to walk alone again. 3 months after our engagement, I was gradually settling into my new life, filled with hope for the future. But then, one day after work, I received a call from my stepfather. His voice didn't sound angry, yet it wasn't the friendly tone I was accustomed to either. "You need to come home right now." A wave of unease surged within me. His words were so brief, with no explanation whatsoever. A part of me wanted to refuse, but I couldn't ignore the thought that something serious might have happened to my mother. I hurriedly drove home, my heart heavy with worry. When I stepped into the living room, I immediately sensed that something was off. My mother was sitting in a chair, her face filled with worry. My stepfather stood beside her with his arms crossed, his expression cold. Alongside them were my stepfather's sons, people who had never been truly close to me. And right in the middle of the room, my fiancée was sitting on the sofa, her eyes red and her lips trembling as if she had been crying for hours. I froze right at the doorway. In that instant, I knew something terribly wrong had happened. The worst scenarios raced through my mind. Had someone in the family passed away? Had some calamity just occurred? I quickly walked over to my fiancée, intending to sit down beside her and comfort her, but before I could do so, my stepfather raised his hand to block me. "Stand still." His voice was as cold as ice. I looked around, confused. "What's going on?" My stepfather fixed his gaze on me and then slowly, deliberately, spoke each word as if carefully controlling his anger. "Do you want to confess, or should I just say it out loud?" I frowned, not understanding what he was implying. "Confess what?" Then he unleashed words that made the blood in my veins freeze. "You have betrayed her. You've been having an affair with her for the past year." I was stunned, almost unable to believe my ears. "What?" Every eye in the room was fixed on me, filled with accusation. I looked at my fiancée, desperately searching her eyes for even a hint of trust in me, but all I saw was pain and hurt. I stammered, trying to offer an explanation. "I don't text anyone else. I haven't even spoken to any other woman besides you. This can't be." But then my stepfather raised his phone, displaying a series of text messages. Someone, a stranger, a woman, had sent messages to my fiancée, claiming that we had been involved for over a year. She insisted that she had no idea I already had a girlfriend, and upon discovering the truth, she felt guilty and decided to come forward and explain everything. Screenshots of text conversations appeared on the phone screen, lengthy exchanges, sweet words, even personal details that only someone very close to me would know. I gaped, feeling as though I were sinking into a nightmare. No, no way. I shook my head, a mix of shock and fury surging in my chest. I don't know her. I've never spoken to her. But who would believe someone accused when all the evidence seems to be stacked against him? My fiancée clutched the phone tightly, tears still streaming down her face. Why would you do this to me? Her voice was choked, pain beyond anything I had ever heard. I didn't do it. I almost screamed. Please, just check my phone. You can look at anything you want. You'll see I've never texted anyone else. My mother sat there, also crying. She said nothing, only covering her mouth with her hand as if she couldn't believe her own son could do something like this. But my stepfather wouldn't let me continue defending myself. He stepped forward, his voice dripping with contempt. Who do you think will believe you? Everything is too clear already. We don't need to hear any more. Desperately, I looked around, searching for a glimmer of hope, a person who would trust me, an opportunity to explain, but there was no one. Then, my stepfather pointed towards the door. Get out of my house. Right now. I'm not going anywhere. I protested, my voice trembling with anger. I have the right to explain. I don't care, he sneered. If I see you on my property one more time, I'll call the police. I looked over at my fiancée, trying to find even a hint in her eyes, a spark of doubt, a slight wavering, a small sign that she still trusted me. But all I saw was loss. I had no other choice. Silently, I turned and left the house, leaving behind everything I had ever loved. I tried to contact them for several weeks afterward, calling, texting, leaving voicemails on every app one could think of, but received no response. After those weeks, I received a call from my stepfather telling me to stop contacting her and that I was no longer welcome in his home or his family. I also tried calling my mother, but to no avail. After about a month, all I received was a message from my mother saying that she was very sad and disappointed. My mother doesn't have many relatives, so she always spent the holidays with my stepfather's family, and they had all shunned me. I even saw their Christmas photos on Facebook, where my ex-fiancée appeared, looking happy, and that broke my heart. The only family that still spoke to me was my paternal uncle and his family, but even they seemed wary of me. The only person I truly trusted was my uncle. Honestly, without him, I don't think I could have made it. He showed me the love of a father that I had always missed, and I will be forever grateful to him. About 6 months after everything, I moved out of the East and settled in California, because I needed to get away from everything. Nearly a year after moving, I received a call from a phone number with my home area code, a number I rarely see anymore. I picked up, and it was one of my stepfather's sons, and I immediately hung up. He called back, and I ignored it, but it haunted me all day. I decided that if he called again, I would answer, and later that night, he did. The call was awkward. He said that my fiancée had been deeply distressed for a long time. It took her nearly a year to even start looking for a new relationship, while I hadn't gone out at all since our relationship ended. A few months later, my stepfather encouraged his son to ask her on a date, and he did. The initial dates went okay, but nothing serious developed. He told my stepfather about it, and that man said, "I didn't get rid of OP for nothing, she's a great girl, and you need to figure it out with her." I nearly collapsed, and anger surged through me. Clearly, he had hired some girl, I still don't know who, to pose as someone I had an affair with, fabricated screenshots of texts, and had them sent to my fiancée. He said he had told him about it about a month ago, and now he didn't know what to do. It seemed that it bothered him so much he couldn't keep it to himself any longer, so he told me that he would inform my mother and my ex-fiancée the next day. He called me first as a courtesy, so he'd know what to tell them. I told him where I was and that I hoped they wouldn't contact me immediately so I could have time to process everything. That was last Tuesday. I just texted him saying that I was ready to speak with them if they wanted and that they could call me the next day. I truly don't know what I'm going to say, nor what they will say. I expect tears and plenty of apologies, among other things. I'm not sure I'm ready to forgive yet. The only person I've shared all of this with so far is my uncle, the one I asked to keep it to himself. Once again, I'm sorry for this long-winded message. My therapist chose the worst week to go on vacation, and I needed to vent. This morning, my stepfather's sons called me and recounted exactly what had happened over the past week. It seems that what my stepfather had told me before wasn't entirely true. He explained that he had been very careful with his words so as not to incriminate himself, in other words, indirectly implying what he had done without saying it outright. The remarkable thing about my stepfather's son is that he's much smarter than I am. Instead of going directly to my mother and my ex-fiancée and getting into a shouting match with his own father, he chose a different approach that I never would have thought of. He managed to get hold of my ex-fiancée's phone and track down that woman. He said it took him a very long time to trace that phone number. He called her and arranged to meet in public, and that was the breaking point of everything. She had been matched with my stepfather on Tinder, which I take as clear evidence that he had been having an affair with my mother. That made me even more furious, for obvious reasons. This girl claimed that she hadn't had any physical relationship with him, but that truth didn't matter to me. What mattered was that my stepfather's son had spoken with her and tugged at her heartstrings with the story of everything that had happened. Apparently, she clearly knew what she was doing. Perhaps the timing in my story really moved her, but still, it didn't change anything for me. She told him everything. $1,000 for a phone call was the deal. He told her what to say and provided her with evidence photos. She made the call, and that was that. My stepfather's son even asked her if she could tell my mother and my ex-fiancé, and even offered to pay her extra. She agreed for free, and that happened yesterday. My stepfather was on a business trip until Wednesday, so at that time, there were 4 people present. She came in and revealed everything to my mother and my ex-fiancé. My stepfather's son said that tears began to flow immediately from all 3 of them. After everything was said, he told them that I was in California and that he would let them know when I wanted to be contacted. This was before I texted him. A little background so you can better understand my mother and my ex-fiancé. This is not an excuse for their actions, just to help everyone understand more. After my father passed away, my mother and I were inseparable. We were each other's support. When I was 16, I began drinking to dull the pain. I had promised my mother that we would spend New Year's together, but in the end, I went out with my drunken friends all over the place. My mother, who had to spend that night alone at home, texted me saying she felt sad because she was lonely, and I felt so guilty that I couldn't bear it. From then on, I stopped drinking until everything fell apart. My mother is someone who always needs someone by her side. She can't stand being alone. I think that when the love between my mother and my father started to fade, I filled that void. And when I grew up and left home, my stepfather filled that void. Then came my ex-fiancée. As I mentioned, she really doesn't have a family. She has trust issues and a past full of bad relationships. Yet, she has never spoken ill of her ex-boyfriends, which I really admired, except in one clearly abusive case. Even though I was so painfully shy that it held me back, I was often told that I was cute, especially by younger girls, meaning girls younger than me, not children. I never liked that title because it didn't sound very manly, but eventually, I learned to appreciate my youthful looks and the fact that I often blushed. My fiancé is less than 3 years older than me. I've always preferred older women and never paid attention to girls who only liked me because they were 18 to 20 years old. That irritated my fiancée when she asked why I wasn't interested in them or why I didn't leave her for someone younger and prettier, etc. I've always found her incredibly attractive, more so than I am, and I always assured her that I never cared about any other girl. Sorry for going off topic, but I hope these details help you understand why I think they did what they did and believed what they believed. Once again, this isn't an excuse for them, and I'm not completely understanding of all their actions. At the end of the call with my stepfather's son, he said that my mother and ex-fiancé both wanted to call me today, and I told him it was fine. So I sat and waited. Around 3 p.m., I felt confused and wondered if he had made it all up just to mess with me. That really worried me. I received a message asking if I was okay. I replied yes and asked if they were really planning to call today. He said they had been trying for the past few hours. I had blocked their numbers when I moved out to the West and forgotten about it, but luckily I hadn't blocked him. I unblocked him, and then my mother called me about 10 minutes later. The first thing my mother said was that I sounded different. I almost hung up right then, managing only to say yes. Immediately after, my mother broke down in tears. I thought I'd feel more, but in truth, the pain of it all overwhelmed me more than her words. My mother asked if I had received her messages. I said no. It seems she had been trying to text for the past year, but I had blocked her number. If she truly wanted to reach me, she could have. That might sound a bit harsh, but it's the truth. I nearly told her that I was willing to rebuild our relationship gradually, and she agreed. My mother also said that she would take all her essential belongings out of the house before my stepfather returned, and that she would file for divorce immediately, and I believe her. In my eyes, my mother may not be perfect, but she has never done anything half-heartedly. I really wish I could see that bastard's face when he returns to an empty house. My ex-fiancée later called and sent tearful apologies just as my mother had. I felt a spark of affection for her. I reminded her of all the times I had promised that I would never do that to her and how deeply I love her. She was distraught, and to be honest, I was glad about that. We talked for about half an hour. It was truly pleasant. Even though I had sworn to myself for over a year that something like that would never happen again, I still thought that perhaps there was something left between us. She said that she still had the ring, and that made me sad. I told her to give that ring to my mother, because it no longer belonged to either of us. I realized that it pained her, and, selfishly, I secretly wished for that too. She asked if she could call or text me. I said, sure, but don't expect an immediate reply, and she understood. Just like with my mother, I said that the chances of us having a future together were very slim. Finally, I spoke with my brother and thanked him for everything he had done. He helped my mother move her belongings out of my stepfather's house, apologized for everything, and promised to inform the rest of the family. As for those I no longer have contact with, and probably will never speak to again, except for my step-grandmother, the eldest in all the families, who has wished me a happy birthday and a Merry Christmas throughout the year. Perhaps she is too old to care now, or maybe she feels remorse, but I will talk to her, even if it seems a bit odd. Sorry for this long-winded message. I will be flying home to attend my uncle's 60th birthday in the first week of March, the first time I've returned home since moving here. I will definitely see my brother again. I don't mind meeting with my mother and my ex-fiancé, but I have made it clear to them that I still have many wounds to heal, and so do they. If anything new happens, I will update you, perhaps after the homecoming trip, but for now, this is enough. This story is not only a personal tragedy but also a warning about the fragility of trust in relationships. When doubt seeps into people's hearts, it can destroy the best of things, even without solid evidence. The main character, though completely innocent, became the victim of a cruel conspiracy, losing his fiancée, his family, and even his honor. The greatest lesson from this story is the importance of communication and verifying information. In any relationship, especially in love and family, honesty and the ability to communicate are the foundations for maintaining trust. If my fiancé had calmly checked my phone or listened to me more, perhaps everything would have turned out differently. Moreover, it reminds us of the damage that unfounded accusations can cause, as they can completely ruin the life of an innocent person. Finally, the story shows that sometimes those we trust the most can be the ones who hurt us the deepest. But even if you are misunderstood or betrayed, it is crucial to hold on to your dignity and integrity, for the truth will one day be revealed. In life, there will be times when you are misunderstood, betrayed, or face injustices beyond your control. In such moments, what matters most is not trying to please everyone, but rather maintaining your calm, honesty, and self-worth. When falsely accused, don't rush into panic or drown in negative emotions. Instead, find a way to communicate clearly, present evidence, and resolve the issue rationally. Furthermore, trust is something that is easy to lose but hard to regain. Therefore, always be honest in your words and actions to build a reliable reputation. And if you find yourself in a situation where you are betrayed or treated unfairly, remember that you don't need to prove your worth to those who are not willing to trust you. Sometimes, losing certain relationships is not necessarily a bad thing. It can be an opportunity for you to find people who truly appreciate and love you. Finally, don't let past hurts stop you from believing in love and goodness. Learn to let go, forgive, and move forward, because the future always brings new opportunities and more deserving people.